Hello, everyone. I am Caron Schuster, the State Director for Convention of States here in Iowa. On behalf of the Convention of States team, I want to welcome you to the Take Back Our Government rally. Thank you for coming here today, for leaving your warm homes, for taking time off your jobs, for caring about your country. A year ago, at the beginning of 2021, we had just over 20,000 Iowans who had signed the Convention of States petition. It took 7 years to get to that point. Over the past year, our volunteers have worked to spread the word, and you have helped to spread the word about Convention of States, a message of hope for our country found in our Constitution. As a result, an additional 19,545 Iowans have signed the Convention of States petition in just 1 year. We have an out-of-control, overreaching, overspending federal government. We have an oppressive federal government that our founders would not even recognize. Washington is broken, and it will not fix itself. But is it too late? Is America lost? I'd like to read to you a quote by Michael Ferris, who is President and CEO of Alliance Defending Freedom and is also a co-founder of Convention of States. He said, "America is made up of its people, but it is governed by those who are active. If people who believe in the Constitution take appropriate and timely action and are willing to sacrifice, then America is not lost. It is only lost when we give up." Those of you who are here today, you are the people who believe in the Constitution. You are the people who are taking appropriate and timely action. You are the people who are willing to sacrifice. And because of you, America is not lost. We can take back our government. Thank you so much for being here today. To pray over today's gathering, please welcome our former state grassroots coordinator for Iowa, Garth Hilton.
I am humbled to be before all of you patriots today, to have this opportunity for all of us together to invoke the mighty hand of God's providence in the affairs of men today. As a template of wisdom for our prayer, we will pray through Psalm 74. This psalmist experienced a national tragedy and ultimately understood the devastation and ruin of tyranny and what it meant for those who lack loyalty to God. These are the reasons for the selection of this psalm. I'm grateful for your patience and sobriety as we pray through God's wisdom for us today. A prayer as big as the problem that we face, a prayer to give glory to God. Right now in your mind's eye, please picture the devastation of Jerusalem as Babylon destroys it and leaves it in ruin. O God, why do you cast us off forever? Why does your anger smoke against the sheep of your pasture? Remember your congregation which you have purchased of old, which you have redeemed to be the tribe of your heritage. Remember Mount Zion where you have dwelt. Direct your steps to the perpetual ruins. The enemy has destroyed everything in the sanctuary. Lord, today we come before you. We know there are consequences for every nation that departs from your wisdom. And we have invited devastation and ruin upon our own land. But we turn our hearts towards you now, Lord, our mighty Father. Your foes have roared in the midst of the meeting place. They set up their own ensigns for signs. They were like those who swing axes in forest of trees, and all its carved wood they broke down with hatchets and hammers. They set your sanctuary on fire. They profaned the dwelling place of your name, bringing it down to the ground. They said to themselves, "We will utterly subdue them." They burned all the meeting places of God in the land. We do not see our signs. There is no longer any prophet, and there is none among us who knows how long. Lord, this day we see mighty forces of men who want to enslave other men that you have created. Dear Father, we place our trust in you alone to deliver us. We trust in your vision and your provision to see us through. How long, O God, is the foe to scoff? Is the enemy to revile your name forever? Why do you hold back your hand, your right hand? Take it from the fold of your garment and destroy them. Yet God, my King, is from of old, working salvation in the midst of the earth. You divided the sea by your might. You broke the heads of the sea monsters of the waters. You crushed the heads of Leviathan. You gave him as food to the creatures of the wilderness. You split open the springs and brooks and dried up for ever-flowing streams. Yours is the day, yours also the night. You have established the heavenly lights in the sun. You have fixed all the boundaries of the earth. You have made summer and winter. Lord, we stand before you, understanding the cosmic nature of the evil that we face, and we know that you are the only one capable of overcoming the evil powers of modern-day Babylons, whether it be from Davos to Beijing or Washington, D.C. We beseech you to crush the heads of Leviathan. For you are the creator of heaven and earth. We earnestly seek your protection for all of humanity around the earth, but especially in this state capital here today, as we humble ourselves before you and assert our rights of true self-governance. Remember this, O Lord, how the enemy scoffs and a foolish people reviles your name. Do not deliver the soul of your dove to the wild beast. Do not forget the life of the oppressed. Have regard for the covenant, for the dark places of the land are full of the habitations of violence. Let not the afflicted turn back in shame. Let the poor and needy praise your name. On behalf of the 40,000 Iowans, we pray for your intervention here in Des Moines to help us overcome the oppression and darkness that haunts every land, bringing chaos and violence. Lord, help us today to peacefully work with your Spirit, to bring freedom to the lives of the oppressed and afflicted, to the poor and the needy, through the resolution to call for a convention of states. Arise, O God, defend your cause. Remember how the foolish scoff at you all the day. Do not forget the clamor of your foes, the uproar of those who rise against you, which goes up continually. Dear Father, we offer this prayer to you, our creator of heaven and earth, the only one with the power to subdue DC and the nations of the world. We humbly bow. Amen.
Thank you, Garth. To lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please welcome Convention of States District Captain and Events Coordinator, a father of three who has served our country in the Army, Nathan Hayes.
Ladies and gentlemen, please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Please remain standing as we bring on the national anthem.
It is my privilege and my honor today to introduce to you the leader of one of the largest grassroots movements in the nation. Please welcome the President and CEO of Convention of States, Mark Meckler.
Thank you. Great job Caron's doing leading the state, wouldn't you say? A big round of applause. I love doing this. I love coming to state capitals all across the country, standing here in the rotundas, looking up, being awed by the beauty, by the splendor, and all of this in your honor. Because we think of these as our seats of government, but they're really the people's house. A lot of times we get disconnected from these places. Maybe we come to them and we're intimidated. How many people are here for the first time at your state capitol? Raise your hand. Thank you guys for being here today. There's a tendency to come to a place like this and to walk around and be so awed that we forget that these places belong to us. From here to New York to California and everywhere in between, including, contrary to what they seem to think in Washington, D.C. today, these houses, the people's houses, belong to us. And I think it's important that we come here, that we feel that sense of ownership, that we know that when we walk these halls in this beautiful building with so much history and we meet with our legislators, that they work for us. I can tell you, having traveled to 48 states in the last 3 years, 18 states now just in the last 3 months, that you are very blessed to live in this great state, that in this state, your legislators inherently understand that they work for you. When I first started in politics about 11 years ago, I had a feeling about politicians. Maybe some of you share this feeling about politicians. I won't fully vocalize it, but let's just say they weren't high on my list. And I still feel that way mostly about folks in Washington, D.C., but having been to so many state legislatures, and here in particular, I have an entirely different feeling about the men and women that serve here in your House and in your Senate. And what I can tell you is, whether we agree or disagree, whatever party they belong to, whatever ideology they profess, generally speaking, they're here for the right reason. They're here because they felt called to serve. They're here because they believed in their state and they knew somebody had to step up and do the right thing, which is to run for office. It's not easy to run for office. It's not easy to win, campaign. It's hard on your family. It's definitely not easy to be a sitting state legislator. These folks take a lot of abuse. You know, we tend to criticize them very heavily when they don't do what we want them to do. And when they do what we want them to do, we tend not to pay very much attention, right? They don't get a lot of thanks. It really is the quintessential thankless job. But for me, having traveled so far and wide across this country and met so many incredible state legislators, I'm very thankful to them. I want you to know that when I think about the founders and who they were and what they stood for, the framers, I think about and I read their stories, they were state legislators. They served in colonial governments, on town councils, on county councils, exactly the same as your state legislators, people who serve in your county government or your city councils. So don't distance yourself too much from the founders, and when you look at your state legislator, think about they're walking in those shoes, and they're doing the best they can to walk in those shoes. So I'd like to start by honoring the state legislators, the senators, and the members of the House of Representatives here in your legislature today. A big round of applause for them. They, as a group, are the second most important people in this building today. The most important people in the building today are sitting in this audience. They're the people who put this event together. They're the volunteers, some from all over the country, who participated in helping with all of this, because they are the fabric of America. You know, we don't know the stories of most of the people who've made American history. We read history, we read Washington and Adams and Jefferson. We know these stories, right? Madison, Patrick Henry speaking, "Give me liberty or give me death." We know those stories, but we don't know the stories of the average people who made America so extraordinary. And there are many more of them, and their stories are just as extraordinary, but mostly lost to history. America is a country built by ordinary people who were extraordinary when it called for it. One of my favorite stories from American history is a story of a great patriot by the name of Captain Levi Preston. Preston was there when the shot was fired that was heard around the world. He came out to serve, he came to fight the Redcoats, and the only reason we know Levi Preston's story, and most of you won't have heard of Levi Preston, the reason we know is because there was a young historian traveling the country by the name of Mellon Chamberlain in 1843. In 1843, the war is long over. In fact, the last remaining Minutemen are in their late 80s and early 90s. Today, we all know people in that age range. Back then, that's Methuselah old, right? Everybody knew if you had a guy that was 85, 90 years old living in your town, everybody knew him and everybody knew Captain Preston. So when Mellon Chamberlain came to town to interview the last remaining Minutemen, they pointed him at Levi Preston. And he went to ask him a series of questions about the American Revolution and why he had fought. And he asked him, did you fight because of the Stamp Act? You were so frustrated by the idea of having to buy these stamps, taxation without representation. You were so angry about that that you went out to fight the Redcoats. Captain Preston said, stamps? Governor Bernard locked them in the armory, and I'm sure I never bought one. So he says, what about the tea tax? I'm sure you were angry about the high taxes on British tea. He said, son, I was a farmer. We drank coffee. We never drank no tea. So it wasn't the Stamp Act. It wasn't the tea tax. These are the things I learned in school. And so he asked him about the great revolutionary writers. Maybe he was reading Burke or Thomas Paine, Common Sense. And Captain Preston said, those men you speak of, I know not their names. We read the Bible, Psalms. Some of us read the Almanac. But those men, I don't know them. So now you can imagine Mellon Chamberlain has just exhausted what he knew about the causes of the Revolutionary War. All the things that you and I learned in school about the Revolutionary War. So he goes big and he says, well, maybe it was just the heavy hand of British tyranny. You were sick and tired of living under British tyranny. And Preston said, tyranny? Never felt a whit of it. No tyranny, no tea tax, no Stamp Act, no inspiration by the great revolutionary writers. So Chamberlain says, well, what was it? Why would you go out to fight the Redcoats if none of those things were true? Levi Preston said something that to me is the greatest summary of the political philosophy of the American Revolution that I've ever heard, then or since. And he said this, when we went out to fight them Redcoats that day, we meant only one thing. We had always governed ourselves, and we always intended to. And them Redcoats, well, they intended that we shouldn't. That's it. It's not complex, it's not lofty, it's not fancy speak. It was just a farmer who said, I'm gonna tell my family what to do. We're gonna govern ourselves. I'm gonna run my own life. I'm gonna run my own business. We're gonna run our own government. You come here, you think you're gonna tell us what to do, that's not gonna happen. And by the way, he was living in a lineage of a long line of people who had done that. 158 years since Jamestown, 5 generations, this country, his countrymen, his father, his grandfather, his great-grandfather, and so on, had governed themselves. So by the time it comes to the American Revolution, it's just unthinkable that England could tell him what to do. It was unthinkable. He's your forefather. I often think about the founding, and I think about Madison and how smart he was and how well-read he was. I think about Jefferson and what a statesman. Franklin, how he knew everything about everything, such a Renaissance man. Washington, the indispensable man. And then I look in the mirror and I think, that's not me. I'm just a guy. Like, what could I possibly do? And then I think about Levi Preston. And I think, you know what? I could be Levi Preston. Because I can govern myself. And when the time comes, I can stand and I can fight. And that's what we're doing. And that's why it's so important to me to be here with you, because you're all Levi Preston. And I hope if you get only one thing out of this today, that when you go home today afterwards, when you're standing in front of the mirror tonight and you're looking at yourself in the mirror, you think, I'm Levi Preston. I could be Levi Preston. Because Levi Preston saved this country and thousands like him, and it's the only thing that has ever saved the United States of America. Every time this country is in crisis, Levi Preston stands. One, and then tens, and then hundreds, and then thousands, and tens of thousands, and millions. And Levi Preston stands and leads the charge on the battlefield. And that's who you are. And that's your heritage. And that belongs to you. You ever sit at home and you watch TV and you watch some guy in Washington, D.C., his name might be Fauci or something, and he's telling you what you got to do, and you're thinking, oh, hell no, you're not going to tell me what to do. Anybody think that? That, my friends, is a little Levi Preston rising in your blood, just boiling in your blood. You got that inside of you. And you got that inside of you whether your relatives, your ancestors go all the way back to the Mayflower, or you just got here and you said the words, I am an American. You swore allegiance to this country. That is in your DNA in this country. And that's what we're fighting for here with Convention of States. There are people in Washington, D.C., and they've been there for a very long time, probably at least 115 years, who think that you're stupid and you're simple and that you can't be trusted with your own lives. And they think that they can, should, and they think they will tell you what to do. What do you guys say to the people in Washington, D.C. that think that they can tell you what to do? No. No, absolutely not. They can't tell you what to do unless you let them, unless we let them. We're at a time when it's just overwhelming the amount of stuff they can think they can tell you to do. And the founders knew that this moment would come. On September 15, 1787, George Mason from Virginia, Colonel George Mason, stands and he addresses the Constitutional Convention there in Independence Hall. And he says, we have a terrible problem with the document we've drafted. We've given the power to the federal government through Congress to propose amendments if they deem them necessary, but we didn't give the same power to the people acting through the states. And he asks a question. Are we so naive that we believe that a federal government that becomes a tyranny will ever propose amendments to restrain their own tyranny? I heard some people laugh out there. Anybody know of any tyrant that's ever said, I have way too much power, I need to give you some of my power? Doesn't happen. So they've taken our power away gradually, and sometimes in big chunks, and sometimes it's about masks, and sometimes it's about vaccines, and sometimes it's about how you can use your property, and sometimes it's about how you're allowed to educate your kids. But we have come to this point that the founders knew would come where they have gone too far. And so he proposed the second clause of Article 5 for a time such as this. He was talking about federal tyranny. And they gave the states, they voted to give the states the power to call a convention to propose amendments, and they were talking about restraining federal tyranny. Is the federal government a tyranny? Yes. So the time has come. And the question for us is, do we as people have the fortitude of Levi Preston? Do you have the fortitude of Levi Preston? Yes. I think you do. That's what inspires me. That's why I'm out here doing what I'm doing. It's because you're out there doing what you're doing. And so they gave us this power. It takes 34 states to call a convention, 2/3 of states. I don't know if y'all heard the news. We got some news today. We've been at 15 states. Today, Wisconsin became state number 16. How's that? That's some good stuff. And I'll tell you, Lord willing, in the next couple of days, Nebraska's going to become state number 17, and we'll be halfway. You are on the march, and you are going to call a convention of states, and you are going to be the next generation of Levi Prestons that saves America. It's an incredible responsibility, though. I'm asking a lot from you. Sometimes people say, well, they don't ask that much of us, right? A few phone calls, come to a rally at the Capitol. I mean, the founders, they put their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor on the line. But us, that's not true. I'm asking a lot of you. I'm asking you to commit. I'm asking you to sacrifice. I see many in the audience who already have. And I'm asking you to keep sacrificing. Talk to your friends. Talk to your neighbors. Be in the fight. They will attack you. They will shame you. Today, this is the way it goes. I got to tell you, I was here today. I was at the cafeteria. One of our opponents is here. I don't know what he's trying to do, but he came up. He decided, he's comparing us, by the way, you'll love this. Apparently, we're all just like the Nazis. Now, I'm just going to tell you, by the way, there's a guy who claims to be a conservative Christian. For the record, to make the record straight, I'm a Christian Jew. Both sides of my family are Jewish, and I accepted the Lord as my personal Savior. Literally, I got it on videotape. I asked him if he's willing to be taped, saying that we're like the Nazis. We're telling the big lie just like the Nazis. And I said, oh, like Goebbels? And he goes, no, you're more like Hitler. So you're going to hear this stuff. They're going to smear you. You're like Hitler. You're with Soros. Yeah, you're with the radical left. The truth is, you're Levi Preston. I'll stand with Levi Preston and against this guy, Robert Brown, or whoever he is, any day, any place. We're going to stand against those people. We're going to stand in faith. We're going to stand in love. And we're going to get this thing done, aren't we? All right. There are so many great volunteers that made this thing happen. You have no idea how much work and planning went into this. I would say this is the most we've ever put into a rally in a state capitol. That's how important your state is to us. That's how important we feel the state is. Iowa leads the nation. People look to Iowa. People watch what happens in Iowa. You guys know how it is in presidential elections. Everybody's watching what you do. And so we know that, and we believe in your state, and we believe that your state needs to lead, and that's why we put so much in. So to all the volunteers, to Caron and her whole team, to Catherine Zamanek, who is your regional director, you guys, a big round of applause to all the volunteers that made this possible. So in every legislature, there are people who serve, lots of people who serve, and then there are some people who lead, who step up when it's not easy, who take on difficult tasks, who do things that people tell them, well, you shouldn't do that, you'll spend political capital, it'll be hard, people won't like you, it'll divide people. And thank God in the legislatures we have people who say, I don't care, I'm willing to do what it takes, I'm willing to stand. It's not an overstatement when I tell you that those people end up being my heroes. When I lay down to sleep at night, I thank God, my country, my family, health, for you, and for the state legislators that are willing to take a stand. It's not easy. They get a lot of abuse for taking a stand. So I want to introduce you to somebody who's become a friend, who's willing to take a stand for Convention of States, who's known for taking a stand. This is Representative Wills, who is the Speaker Pro Tem here. He's from House District 1, born and raised in Iowa, 25-year Army veteran. That's not a surprise, right? Retired as a first sergeant after doing several tours. He resides in Spirit Lake with his wife and 3 children. Please give a big round of applause to Representative Wills.
Wow, thank you. Thank you so much for all being here. Thank you for coming out in the cold. It wasn't easy today to get here. I appreciate you all being here. And I come here to stand in front of you, and I will tell you, I don't know what to say. Tough for a politician to not have words to say, right? But I appreciate you so much because, as my friend Senator Santorum said, he said, just let the Spirit move you. Because I honestly don't know what to say, so I thought I'd say this. 9 years ago, when I was deciding whether I was going to run for the legislature or not, my wife and I were sitting in front of TV. We were watching Fox News. I can remember it like it was last night. And both of us together at the exact same time, remember, I'm trying to decide if I should run for this seat. Both of us at the same time said, why don't they do something about Washington, D.C.? And I think that Donald Trump was wrong when he said that it was a swamp. Oh no, it's much worse than a swamp. Washington, D.C. is a cesspool, and it needs to be fixed. It needs to be drained and fixed. But we both said at the same time, somebody needs to do something. And so all of a sudden it dawned on me, we're trying to decide whether I should run for the state legislature or not. And I decided at that moment I was going to run for the state legislature. And here I am. And now, with your help, with your assistance, we're going to change that cesspool of Washington, D.C., and we're going to make it work again, because right now it is not working. It is broken. Now, before I got up here, they said that I had 25 years of serving in the military. And sure, I did. I served a lot, and thank you, veterans. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your sacrifice. I served in a lot of places in the world. I saw tyrants. I saw people who would be tyrants. I saw police generals who asked me if he could kill someone just so that everybody would fear him. Those are tyrants. Now, we've got something similar to that in Washington, D.C., but not once did I have a tyrant anywhere in the world who was willing to give up their power that they had stolen, robbed, and killed to get. Not once. So how do we expect, as some people in this building expect Washington, D.C. to just miraculously give up their power? You know what? I'm 55 years old, and for as long as I can remember, the people that are the most hated politicians are Washington, D.C. politicians. And why is that? It's because they don't do what we ask them to do. So I'm here to say right now, we're going to tell them what to do. And that's what you're all about. We're going to tell them. We're going to be Levi Preston. We've got to be, for the sake of our country. I'd never heard that story before, and I'm so glad I did. But for the sake of our country, each one of us has to be Levi Preston. And we have to take back our country, and we have to have a balanced budget amendment. We have to limit the power of the federal government, and we have to look at term limits as an option. But we need to do that as a whole, as a group, unified together. And I think that's all I have to say, because it's all about you. It's all about you. You're the most important people in this building today. Thank you.
Y'all are blessed to have people like this in your legislature. Really, and you really do. I've been to a lot of them. This is a pretty extraordinary place. The building's beautiful, one of the most beautiful in the country. But what you feel inside the building is the culture of your state, right? Because these buildings are filled up with people who live here, people who are born here, people who've spent their lives here, and it affects the way it feels inside the building, what happens here. And you guys are doing some really impressive stuff here, because you have people in the House and people in the Senate who are willing to do it, who are willing to take a stand. So our next speaker is another person willing to take a stand, a guy who I'm guessing isn't really scared of very much, and this is Senator Jesse Green. Senator Green lives in Senate District 24, where he's a fifth-generation farmer. He farms beans, oats, hay, and bucking horses. That's impressive. That's how I know I got a guy who's not scared of anything, right? He was elected as the youngest chairman in Dayton rodeo history. Senator Green is a Christian conservative, and he's taught Bible classes to middle school students. He receives the Greater Fort Dodge Growth Alliance Top 10 Under 40 Young Professionals. It's my honor and pleasure to introduce you to Senator Jesse Green.
Well, first off, I want to thank Mark Meckler, Rick Santorum, Steve Dace, Representative John Wills, Karen Schuster, Catherine Zemanek, Bill Gustoff, and many others who have put so much time and energy into this valiant effort here today. But most of all, I want to thank you. You know, the Article 5 Convention of the States is a paramount tool that our founders gave us to maintain checks and balances in Washington. It is great because really, it's not a tool, it's a movement that is driven purely by the people in the states when the federal government has become too irresponsible and cannot live within its means. Finance radio personality and author Dave Ramsey says that the first thing someone needs to do if they are in financial trouble is to feel their money once again. Do you know why casinos give you poker chips instead of paying everything in cash? It's because they slowly want to separate the feelings you have to your money. It is a lot easier to spend a chip than it is to spend cash. That is why financial coaches will often encourage those in financial trouble to cut up their credit cards and to develop new habits in order to regain the value of what their dollar should be. At the players' table in Washington, they forego even the use of poker chips to spend your tax dollars with. With a stroke of a few pens and a couple backdoor deals and handshakes, they can spend trillions. Washington has lost the feeling of the value of a dollar for the American public. And this is not just any dollar, this is your hard-earned dollar. In 1984, the year I was born, the national debt was $1.5 trillion, which is 38% of the national GDP. 8 years later, we can recall the famous presidential election where Ross Perot made his case that the national debt was our nation's #1 threat. He struck a chord with so many voters and won, as a result, the most votes by an independent in recent history. In 2015, our national debt hit $18 trillion. That's the first time that our debt reached 100% of our GDP since World War II. We responded, the nation responded, by electing Donald Trump in one of the largest Republican trifectas in recent history. When we sent all of those Republicans to Washington, I didn't consider the Convention of States movement as a necessity. I, along with many of you here today, figured the Republicans that we sent to Washington would honor their word to us and they would get their fiscal house in order. Regrettably, that trust remains unfulfilled. Like an average politician, they overpromised and they underdelivered. In 4 short years, the so-called fiscal conservatives that we sent to Washington added another $9 trillion of debt. Neighbors and friends, we did our job. We sent to Washington those Republicans that made promises to us, but they failed us. This proves to me that really our war is not between Republicans and Democrats, but rather a war against Main Street and the politically connected in Washington. That is why that the Convention of States is a bipartisan effort. Thankfully, everyone that is here today has not given up. Days like today give me so much hope. I have always maintained that since Ross Perot gave his warnings in 1992 that the national debt was a #1 threat facing our country today. The day that I leave this building from public service, I will not look back with regret and say that I didn't do something about this threat. This effort to call a Convention of the States is the strongest message we can send to Washington. It is also one of the last options we have to limit the power of Washington on the American people. I am thankful for the opportunity to be a part of this moment and this effort. Brothers and sisters, in closing, there is nothing in life that happens by accident. Today is a divine appointment that God has established for us to gather, to encourage one another, and to send a message to Washington that here in Iowa, we believe it is time to cut up the credit card. We need to remind Washington who is in charge, and that is us. We must have a balanced budget amendment. We must have it now. So I call upon my colleagues here to be unified in allowing Iowa to be the 17th state to call for a Convention of the States and to make this a reality. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and God bless you.
It's always good to have a bronc rider on your side, you know? Look, you know, we come here, we stand on the shoulders of giants. And by giants, again, I'm not referring to the great men and women in history that we know the stories of. I'm talking about people who were willing to put it all on the line. Levi Preston was a guy that was willing to put it all on the line, and so many others have followed in his footsteps over the last couple of centuries. You can go back through the wars and people who've raised their hand and say that I'm willing to fight. I know we have a lot of veterans in the audience today. Raise your hand if you're a veteran. Big round of applause for all our veterans. Thank you. I have a son who is in the Marine Corps. He was in the Marine Corps. He's still a Marine. Once a Marine, always a Marine, right? And he's in law school now. But I remember when he took his oath, when he first went into the Marine Corps, and it was just, if you've watched your kids do this, it's just breathtaking. And it's not fancy. It's not in some fancy place. It's literally at the recruiting depot, and boom, they just blow him through. But I remember just thinking, he just said he was willing to die to defend our Constitution. I mean, and I didn't even know the oath, really. And I was surprised by this. It's not an oath to the military. It's not an oath to the president or the flag. It's to defend the Constitution from enemies, foreign and domestic. Like, sign in blood. Everything, all on the line. And I remember when he walked out, and last time we saw him until he was done with boot camp, and he walked out, and I remember thinking, I gotta fight. He's willing to do that. My son, 18 years old, is willing to say that. Then I gotta fight. I never served in the armed forces. I have an obligation to my country. If he's willing to put it on the dotted line and sign in blood, I gotta fight. For those of you who did that, who put it on the line, who sacrificed, we gotta fight for them. We have a lot of veterans that are involved in the Convention of States all across the country. And I've heard something before them, from them before that I've never heard before being engaged in this movement. And they've said, I've heard it over and over, different people say to me, different branches, my oath never expires. Like, they're not active duty anymore. Maybe they're not even reserves. Maybe they're just retired and they're out and their obligation is done. But they say, my oath never expires. That means they feel compelled that they have signed on the dotted line with the Lord as their witness that they will defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And so our veterans in Convention of States hold a very special place in our hearts. Now I'm going to introduce, thank you. Because my son's a Marine, I obviously have a little bit of bias towards the Marine. No offense to the other branches. We can get into the inter-branch humor later. So I'm excited to be bringing up a Marine veteran. George Carson is a veteran and one of our volunteers. He's a regional director, meaning he oversees a lot of different districts in the state. He's a district captain for Convention of States, and it's my honor and pleasure to bring up George Caron.
Thank you. And if you haven't guessed, I'm just like the rest of you. No different. Just living to be an Iowan. But thank you for the opportunity to speak today. And if I'm not polished, it's because I don't speak very often. I was asked to speak to you because I'm a veteran, a Convention of States volunteer, and a patriot, none of which I count myself good at. I have not done enough to maintain and ensure our liberties. I can tell you in the last 2 weeks, I had the privilege to call many in our telepatriots and talk to many fellow Iowans, some of them veterans. Today, I would like to tell you about two of them that could not make it to the rally, but really wanted to be here. I had the pleasure to talk to Sergeant Skip, as he likes to be called. He is a Vietnam veteran who is now wheelchair bound with one eye missing and an arm immobile. He says, my body is riddled with Agent Orange and my health is failing. I asked him about his veteran care and he said it was great. They take good care of me and they've done all they could do. He said he really believed in what we were doing and wants to show his support. He just cannot make the trip. He expressed that Washington is broken and we desperately need COS. The next day, he called me back again and expressed his support and told me he really wishes he could find a way to get here to the rally and support us. I also had the pleasure of talking to Dwayne, who is 91-year-old Korean War vet. He is also wheelchair bound because he recently had fallen and fractured his hip. He has been on oxygen for quite some time. He is worried about our country and wanted to be here. He says we give him hope because we are standing up to defend our freedoms. He said until his dying breath, he will fight to maintain the inheritance of liberty given to him by his parents and the generations before him. Both of these men care deeply about their country and have been following Convention of States for some time. I was able to share COS and how Iowa has grown and doubled our supporters in the last year. I shared about Convention of States. Both of them became energized, enthusiastic, hopeful that we would succeed and our republic would be returned to the original intent of self-governance. They both thanked me for taking the time to listen. They said, nobody listens to us anymore. As veterans, many of us have seen the tragedy of tyranny. Skip, Dwayne, and I understand why Convention of States is a solution to keep our self-governing nation. Our veterans, brothers and sisters, served, and some died to keep America a land of liberty. I came to realize unless I stand up now and work on a solution to keep us free from tyranny, my children and grandchildren would one day ask me, Dad, what did you do? Dad, what did you do? And I would have to say, sorry, I was too busy, too fearful to speak out, and just thought someone else would do it, so I did nothing. I'm sorry you have to live in tyranny, have no property rights, and your children are now the property of the state. But it was just too hard. The task was too much to bear, so I did nothing. Sorry. Like many of you, God has shaken me to my core and awakened me. I want to be able to face my God, my children, Dwayne, Skip, and my fellow veterans and say, I gave all I could. I fought the good fight. I am no longer lukewarm, but press on with determination to see Convention of States a reality and return my country to its founding principles. Convention of States gives hope to us veterans. Thank you, and God bless you.
I find that difficult to follow. So many have given so much for this country, and we're going to do our best to save it. I'll tell you, people ask me, well, what's going to happen? And I don't know what's going to happen. One of my favorite quotes from one of the greats, John Quincy Adams, when he was serving in the United States House of Representatives. Most people don't know he went to the House after he was president. He was asked why he kept fighting. He was fighting for abolition, and he had no chance of winning. And he said, duty is ours, but the results belong to God. So we fight. We fight regardless of what the outcome is. We fight regardless of whether it looks dark or whether there is bright. We fight because the duty belongs to us, and nothing shows that better than our veterans. So, wow, thanks, George. I appreciate it. One of the things I really appreciate is folks who get on board and then stay on board. This thing goes through cycles. We get it going in a legislature, and then we get a defeat, and sometimes it slows down, and sometimes we miss a year when we want to file. You just never know what's going to happen. But some people are there year in and year out, cycle in and cycle out. They're such believers. They're so fervent in their persistence. They're willing to fight on no matter what happens. And that's the next representative I'm going to introduce. This is Representative Shannon Lundgren. She was our sponsor as far back as 2017, I think. She's from House District 57. She's from Peosta, Iowa, and she's a long-term COS champion. Representative, it's an honor to introduce you today.
Thank you. It is awesome to be here with you today. I am the great-granddaughter of an immigrant, the granddaughter of a baker, and the daughter of a veteran. And so those of you that have served our country, I thank you. Some of us can't do that. Some of us just don't have the courage to do that. But Article 5 of the Convention of States gives us, the people, the power to make a change with our federal government. I carry this little pocket Constitution and our articles, and this book, The Law of Article 5 by Robert Nadelson. I'm sure all of you in this room probably know who he is and has listened to him. And he likes to debunk some of the things that our opponents say that are going on and what might happen if we hold a convention of states. But we all know that the foresight of our founding fathers decided that it was important that we, the people, have the control over what our government says and does. They are not in charge of us. We are in charge of them. We send them to DC to do work on our behalf. And we all know how bureaucratic Washington, D.C. has gotten. I'm not really positive that our elected officials in D.C. have the power over the bureaucrats anymore. So it is definitely time that we take a stand and rein in our federal government to ensure that our future generations have the opportunity to live in the free country that our veterans fought for. I own a very small business. I own a restaurant over in Peosta, Iowa by Dubuque. And I can tell you, I go home on the weekends and work in our restaurant with my husband and our oldest daughter. So every day I encounter people just like us. I serve them their beer and their lunch, and we talk about the issues that are concerning. And that's what I bring back to our state house. But where is that communication with our federal legislators? And states like Iowa, and we have great legislators in our state, they have no power and no control over the bureaucracy. And so I appreciate that all of you are here. We are going to continue to do what we can here in the state of Iowa, and we need your help. You need to call your senators. You need to call your state legislators. You need to explain to them why this is important and why the time is now. We just came off of a pandemic, and we all know the tyranny that we faced as a state, as a nation, and it's still going on, and I don't think that pandemic is going to end, ladies and gentlemen, because we've given them a little power. So make sure you please contact your state legislators, ask them point blank if they are in favor of calling a convention of states, and use the tools at COS to debunk any of the myths that they are going to try and throw at you. It is now or never, and history has its eyes on us. Thank you.
See, the more of them come up here, the more hope you have, right? That's definitely how I feel. You know, it's important in any legislature that you got folks like me that have the gray hair, or maybe some with the less hair, right? The wisdom of the years, they've been around, they've seen some things outside the legislature and inside. I saw you touch your dad's head there. Like, my dad's got a shiny one too, so it's okay. It's important that that wisdom is in a state legislature. The wisdom, the collective years, but it's also important that we have young people coming up in the legislature. That's critically important. I mean, I think about all the time, like, who's coming up behind, right? Who's going to carry the torch? Because every generation is going to have the fight for liberty. They're going to be engaged in that fight one way or another. And so we need to have those people. So I'm excited to introduce this next representative, Representative Bobby Kaufman. He's chair of State Government Committee, young guy to chair State Government Committee. He's a big fan of COS. He's been a big supporter. He's a co-sponsor. He's from Wilton, District 43. Bobby, come on up and talk to the people. Thanks for being here.
Good afternoon, everyone. I was going to take some notes and try to be scripted, but I tend to be too politically correct when I write notes, so I'm just going to wing it here. My committee is responsible for this bill being published along with our numerous supporters and co-sponsors in the legislature. And as I was approached about this issue years ago, I thought of my guiding principles on why I ran for office. I ran for office for basic freedoms. I ran for office to make sure that a federal government does not dictate your daily lives, but the way the founders intended it, that you dictate theirs. But if you look, I think many of us today, myself included, would have probably been in that ship in 1776 on a Christmas evening, crossing the Delaware River, dodging icebergs to overthrow an empire. But what the federal government does and what we do in response are two completely different things. And you look at the common denominators from today, back in 1776 when King George reigned over us. Sometimes the similarities are a little eerie. You've got a federal government filled with hubris that just oozes with contempt for the average American. They think they're better than us, they think they're smarter than us, and they think that they should control us. Well, the founders gave us an opportunity, the politically correct version, to push back, and that is the Convention of States. But we in Iowa are a citizen legislature. We're not career politicians. I'm a farmer by trade, and most of us have real jobs out with real people, so I don't always like to subscribe to political correctness. So politically speaking, we do have the Convention of States to push back, but for me, the citizen, and on behalf of what I believe as many of you and what our founders would do, when it comes to these gun-grabbing, freedom-hating, over-regulating, civil liberty-violating tyrants, here's my message. Thank you.
I told you it's good to have some young blood in the legislature, didn't I? Man, that's awesome. I love that. All right, so, you know, every 4 years you guys have a level of importance in the country that rises above everybody else, because you guys pick first, right? And men and women come through here, and they travel the whole state, and they meet thousands, tens of thousands of people. They shake hands, they develop support. It is the most down-home, natural, face-to-face kind of politics anywhere in this country during the presidential cycle. And for those of us who don't live here, it's hard to even understand. It's so different than everywhere else. But I can tell you, when you talk to people who've lived through the experience, presidential candidates that have come through here, they'll tell you it's the most special experience in the country. And because of that experience, you guys know the next speaker pretty well. Because Rick Santorum came through here, and he spent time with all of you. And he spent time in your communities, in your farm communities, in your cities, in every corner of the state. And I know, because I've talked to him a lot about it, he fell in love with this state. He loves this state. So of all the states we go to, he's like, I'll come back to Iowa anytime. I'm always happy to be here. You know, Rick and I have known each other for quite a while. We met, of all places, we met hunting, really is how we met. Hunting pheasants in South Dakota. We had a mutual friend who would invite us on these trips. And so I got to know Rick not as a politician. I didn't get to know Rick as some guy on TV. I got to know Rick as a fellow hunter. You know, riding out to the fields, walking the fields with him, sitting around afterwards having a beer, and just getting to know him as a person. There are a lot of people who rise to levels of greatness in this country that we see on television. They become senators, maybe they run for president, they become famous in that world, everybody knows their name, and I'm impressed by that. It's not easy to do, by the way. It's incredibly difficult to do. You have to be skilled and savvy and persistent. You've got to be able to just get out there and work like almost nobody else. It's just hard work. But a lot of those people I would call, well, maybe they've achieved greatness, but there's something about goodness that is very different than greatness. You meet a lot of people who've accomplished great things, and they're not necessarily good people, the best people. The thing that I can tell you about Rick Santorum, knowing him as a person before I knew him as a politician or a political figure, is this is a truly good man. If you want to go to somebody for advice about what you should do in your life to be a good person, this is the guy I would choose. And I feel incredibly blessed and privileged that he has decided to become part of the Convention of States organization. He's brought so much more to this organization than I ever thought possible. The most important thing that he's brought for me is a good friend. So please give a warm welcome to my good friend, Rick Santorum.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. It is, as Mark said, it is great to be back in Iowa. I can't tell you how grateful I am for the hospitality and the support that she showed me and my family. It's been 10 years since the Iowa caucuses and that long night in January of 2012. And all I can say is that I wanted to come back because I want to make sure that, just like Bobby indicated, that Iowa stays #1. Different finger. But I want Iowa to lead. You know, that's what you do. That's how I see Iowa. And that's why I invested all that time and energy back in 2012 in Iowa, because I knew that you folks are not afraid to lead. You're not afraid to stand up and be countercultural. You're not afraid to not pick the favorite horse. You look at things, you understand things, you research it, you do the work, and then you have the courage to act. That's how I see Iowa. And right now, Iowa needs to be Iowa. Iowa, this legislature needs to lead like it has on so many other things this session. It's been amazing, the accomplishments this session has had, but it needs to lead on one more thing. And I'm excited that we can see this huge crowd, but I'm excited that we have an opportunity now. Boy, I feel like I'm back on the campaign trail. This is great. I love it. Here we go. So Okay. I'm not going to stop that. Okay, let's, if you can hear me, I'm going to keep talking. So, as I always say, I'd rather be heckled than ignored. So, let me just say first, and I didn't say it, thank you for what you did for me in 2012 and giving me that robust 34-vote victory in the 2012 race. So I should thank you for that. I'm someone that knows personally about voter integrity. Every vote counts, right? Every vote should count, and every vote that's a proper vote should count, right? And so I know that for sure. Let me just say this. I come to you as someone speaking here at Convention of the States that back in 2012, I was not a supporter of Convention of the States. When it first came out, I had some serious questions about it. I talked to a lot of people, some of whom were opposing it, in the country, and they told me of their concerns, and I thought, well, maybe those are very legitimate concerns. And candidly, I didn't really think much about it until actually earlier this year. And Mark, I was at one of those hunting trips he talked about, and he talked with me about it. And I said, okay, I'm going to do my homework, just like you folks do. I'm going to do my homework. And I'm going to see whether this is really the right thing, because I can tell you this, a lot of things have changed in 10 years. That this country and the federal government, as bad as it was when I campaigned here 10 years ago, it is far beyond what I think any of us would have expected to happen this quickly. And candidly, my big concern is that it's happening on both sides with both parties. You have too many in Washington who are too comfortable with all the power they have, and in fact like that power and aren't really interested in giving it back to the people or to the states. And what I saw, particularly in the last 10 years, with now the concentration of power in the executive, the Congress has become so dysfunctional they can't do anything. And so as a result, both sides, when their president gets in, they ask the president to use all of his executive authority, real and not real, to do things unilaterally. That is a dangerous thing that's happening in this country. More and more executive orders, more and more rulemaking, more and more standing up to the Congress and to the courts, all that power. And we are panicked because, look, I know all of you, like me, are concerned about what's happening in this country. And so if we ever get a Republican back in, we want him to do all these things, pass all these things, get all these executive orders to change everything. You can't have a country that's flipping back and forth by a king moving the country back and forth every time he comes into office. That doesn't work. It's bad for the country, and it takes our freedom away. So here's why I decided to step forward and look at this thing seriously. And here's what I found. This is a constitutional process. Our founders put this in Article 5 of the Constitution for a moment just like now. They knew someday the federal government was going to get big and out of control, and the power would concentrate in one person. They knew that would happen because they knew history. And they saw it happen in every other government. The emperors and the kings always would consolidate power. Oh, they'd start out as a republic or they'd start out as a democracy, but they always ended up with one person in power because the country would be so divided that neither side could get along, and so they supported the most powerful, someone who would force their way on everybody else. You see, our founders understood that this country was not going to be like theirs, and the only way it could happen is if we allowed federalism. What does that mean? That means that it's okay for California to be California. If you want to be crazy and bankrupt your state, go ahead, okay? If you want to put mandates and you want to have all these restrictions of freedom and you want to protect the Delta smelt more than you do unborn babies, that's your right to do that as California, but don't try to impose that on the rest of the country. That's why everybody is so upset, because we see Washington doing something that historically it's never really done, which is trying to make everybody like New York and California, trying to impose their values on every part of the country. And again, I'm okay if New York and California want to do that, but don't impose it on Iowa. And the reason that happened is because the courts and the Congress and the president have all abdicated their checks and balances responsibility and allowed that accumulation of power. If you look at the Constitution and you look at the enumerated powers in Washington, they mean nothing to the federal government anymore, because the courts have stripped all those limitations away. The only way to put that genie back in the bottle. Washington is not going to fix Washington. Iowa has to fix Washington. I know that scares some people. Some within our ranks are afraid of that, because, candidly, they don't trust you and your state legislators. They don't trust the people. They don't believe that we have the ability to actually have a convention of states and actually limit the power of the federal government. But here's what I would say to them. If we don't have a convention of states, does anyone believe that what we've seen over the past 60 years in this country, this ever-expanding just leviathan of government growing in Washington, does anyone think that's going to change on its own? So if you know it's only going to get worse, what's the risk? What is the risk of having people from all 50 states come together and try to find some common ground to take the power away from Washington? Remember, we're talking about state legislators here. I was saying to you, I spoke to your Senate and House caucus earlier today, and I said, you know, if I'm California and I'm at a convention of states and there's a resolution in front of me, or amendment in front of me, that says the federal government can't legislate on health care, as an example, right? That they have no power because they don't under the Constitution. But if we actually had an amendment that did that, and I'm a liberal Democratic representative from California, I'm thinking, you know what? Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe I could vote for that, because I don't want them in Washington stopping me from going to a single-payer healthcare system. So remember, Washington, to some degree, limits the real crazy states from doing what they want to do. So the idea that this can't happen is just false. There are 31 state legislatures right now controlled by Republicans. In this next election, which I believe will be the best election that Republicans have seen in my lifetime, right? I think you'll see us get to 34 states controlled by Republicans, which is the number you need to get this voted on and passed and have a convention of states, not 10 years from now, but in a year or two. This could happen now at a time, let's be honest, Americans don't have a lot of hope that Washington's going to get better. You hear things, crazy things from people about what they have to do to save our republic. This isn't a crazy thing. This is a constitutional thing. This is a thing within our Constitution that our founders put in place. I believe we have an opportunity now, not 10 years from now. Wisconsin just passed, it became the 16th state. Nebraska I think the day after tomorrow is going to be the 17th state. We have other states that are lined up, West Virginia, North Carolina, Ohio, others that are all in the queue. We need Iowa to get in that queue. We need Iowa to start leading this country again and showing what conservative leadership is all about in this state legislature. And we need your help to make that happen. I want to thank all of you for coming out here on this beautiful January Iowa day. I want to thank the legislators for stepping up. You know, there are people on the other side of this, in both parties. And it's not an easy thing to do to step out when you have opposition on both sides. And so for your legislators who are stepping up and leading and sponsoring, you need to make sure that you're there for them. And you need to go out and communicate this message. I really believe this. I think George Mason put in Article 5, Convention of the States, as the safety valve, as the last chance for a republic to survive. Because they knew there were three things when it came to freedom. One was winning freedom. And that's what the revolution was about, to win freedom. Second was to establish freedom. And that was hard. And we did the most amazing job in the history of the world. We established it with our Constitution. And we've created the greatest republic in human history. But they knew that the third thing was the hardest thing to do. And that is to maintain freedom. Time always gets you. We all know that as people, right? We all know time gets you. It has the same effect, a corrosive effect on our bodies and the corrosive effect on the body politic in America. And it has eroded. Our founders knew this time would come. They didn't know when, but they knew it would come. And they provided us this mechanism as a fountain of youth, re-engaging you, the public, the grassroots, the state legislatures across this country to come together and revive this dying republic. Iowa, it's your turn. Lead. God bless you.
Okay, wait, I'm going to do a quick straw poll, all right? All in favor of Mitt Romney, say aye. All in favor of Rick Santorum, say aye. There we go. Awesome. Okay, so, one of the things I love about Rick is he's been around so long. He has such long-term vision for the country. He knows how to look back. He knows how to look forward. And I think he gets up here and he speaks from the heart and he's smooth, right? He just knows how to talk. Being able to talk is important in politics, right? They say the pen's mightier than the sword. You can sting people with your tongue. You've got to be able to write. You've got to be able to speak. These are incredibly important skills, especially in the modern era of communication. Social media platforms, digital audio platforms, podcasts, radio, turning that into books. If you're good at that, you can have a huge impact on the American body politic. And if you're willing to be bold, if you're willing to take some risks, if you're willing to put it on the line, you can have transformational impact on the American body politic. And I'm really excited to have somebody here who's done that. I've had the opportunity to know Steve Dace over the years, to watch his career start to grow and then blossom and then explode. I've seen him stick to his values no matter what. And I have to say, he is the one person more than anybody else I know that when Anthony Fauci goes to sleep at night, he sweats about our friend Steve Dace. So it's my honor and pleasure to bring up the one, the only Steve Dace.
I always thought it would be a good life if, when they finally put me in the ground, demons in hell wiped the sweat off their brow, because suddenly it got a little easier for them now. And then based on what Mark just said, what kind of reaction I get from Anthony Fauci, mission accomplished on that front. So I'm a relative late convert to this issue. I had discussed it, looked at it for several years. And because I'm a total depravity kind of guy, and because if I were around in the 18th century, I would have been one of those anti-federalists that just doesn't trust human nature at all and would want everything explicitly spelled out, anticipating a day like this that we now live in would come. I had questions, I had reservations about this. The whole idea of a runaway convention, for example. And then I lived through the last 10 years. We have a runaway presidency. We have a runaway Congress. We have a runaway senator. And I mean, our own senator now wants your kids, the one you guys probably voted for, wants our sons maybe to go die in Ukraine for nothing. Why? On and on it goes. Yeah, absolutely applaud that. And then I realized the entire damn government has run away, and all they do is run me over. So at least I'll take my chances with a runaway convention when I get to show up to that, when you get to show up to that, and then maybe you can run some people over too for a change, as opposed to being the roadkill in this process the entire time. Maybe we get to go on offense for once. We are at the end of a football game. We don't know what a gender is. We don't know what a border is. We don't know what a criminal is. We don't know what a citizen is. Hell, we don't know what a doctor is right now. There is a licensed physician that used to serve in this body. His name is Dave Hartsuch. They're now sicking the medical board on him in Iowa, not California, not New York, here, where we were probably the freest state in the union the last couple of years, where our governor and our politicians actually did a phenomenal job not buying into the COVID stand panic porn. And yet, you should applaud that, absolutely. I've never been more wrong about anything in my life than Kim Reynolds, and I'm extremely happy about that. So you should applaud that too. Yes, applaud me being wrong, please, yes. But my point is, I've traveled back and forth with my job at the Blaze between here and Texas quite a bit the last couple of years, and I know up here, especially this time of year, we look at Texas like a Valhalla. We've been a lot freer in Iowa the last couple of years than even Texans have been. And yet, despite the fact we set the standard on COVID sanity in our state, a former state senator right now is facing a medical board. Why? Because he gave life-saving treatments to people that work, that I've taken, that people I love have taken, that I've seen hundreds of people all over the country take, and that actually work. And they work. David Hartsuch is not some neighborhood quack. He used to be in the legislature. Actually, come to think of it, that's maybe not the best argument for not being a quack, but you know what I'm saying. This is a serious individual. And yet, in a state like Iowa, if your runaway bureaucratic administrative state believes that it has the power and authority to get between a doctor and a patient when a life is at stake, if they think that here, what do they think everywhere else? We don't have time anymore to work the process. There is no process anymore. We don't have time anymore to vote our way out of this. Yes, it's going to be an excellent year for Republicans this fall. But really, what have most of them done to deserve it? What did they do other than we stood here while Democrats wrecked the country? What else have they done? What is their vision? What is their plan? Outside of a place like Iowa, where you have a governor that has stood with you, there's all kinds of places like Idaho, Montana, when they see Democrats in those states. There's like 6 Democrats in the entire Idaho state legislature. They cannot get any of the kind of legislation we do here in Iowa passed there. In states where when they see Democrats, they call the police because they don't know what that is. They don't live as free as we do here. We can't vote our way out of this. The vast majority of Republicans that will win in November are useless other than speed bumps. We have to take this power back ourselves. We cannot outsource our citizenship any longer. The answer is us. It is now time. Just as we did with the retention election in this state 10 years ago, we are still the only state in American history that removed by popular vote Supreme Court justices. It's never happened before or since in this country's history. There were a lot of conservatives at the time who did not want to take part in that. It was risky. We need a constitutional convention instead. Instead, a group of us said, you know what, screw that noise. We're going to take the power our damn selves, and we're going to get rid of these people by popular ballot, because in Iowa, our rights we will maintain, our liberties we prize. We will do this ourselves. We made history in this state 10 years ago when we did that. It is time to make history in this state once again. We are at the end of the football game. You know, if you're behind in a game, halftime, end of the third quarter, even middle of the fourth quarter, the coach would be nuts to call for a Hail Mary pass, right? It is a risky play. Often it gets picked off more than it's caught. Most of the time it just gets batted down into the ground. The reason why we remember the Hail Mary passes that worked, like Tate to Holloway or Flutie to Phelan, it's because they almost never work. When do you throw one of these plays? When you're at the end of the game. The clock will go zero. And you can sit around on the sidelines and you can debate with you and your assistant coaches. Is this a prudent play? Will it work? What's the percentages that will work? The clock is still ticking. The clock will go to zero. When the clock hits, that is going to happen. No matter how much you pontificate on whether this play is prudent, that clock is ticking down. It will hit zero. When it hits zero, the game is over. That's it. There's no more time for any more of your prudence, any more of your planning. The game is over. The scoreboard reads, someone won, someone lost. And that's it. Culturally, that is where we are. This is the end of the game. As they said in a movie that made a little bit of money a couple of years ago, we're in the end game now. We are in the end game now. In this last 23 months, we have seen things happen in this country that we thought was for left behind books, for really bad, cheesy Christian movies that even make us cringe. It was our real life. We watched children choked out with Chinese face diapers that don't work. We're watching doctors and nurses lose their jobs because they won't take a jab that with this new Omicron variant does not work. It doesn't work. We've watched them change the names and titles and definitions of everything. What's a doctor? What's a medicine? What's an election? What's a ballot? Who's a voter? We're in the end game now. The clock, while we pontificate, and the temptation when we're in a state like ours, when we have a good governor and we have a good legislature for the most part, is to say we don't need to do anything radical here. The good guys are in charge. What happens when the good guys aren't? What happens when they aren't? And as we've learned all over the country, that Iowa Medical Board going after David Hartsuch, where did they get such ideas? From CNN, from New York, from California, from the places where the good guys aren't in charge. No, I say to the people representing us that have done a fantastic job these last couple of years, this is exactly why you need to vote for this. This is because ultimately you do believe in representing our interests. That's why you've done it. That's why you've done it well. That's exactly why you need to do one more thing: return this last mechanism of power back to the people where the power ultimately belongs. Give it back to us. Civilizations end. That's why we have encyclopedias. Empires fall. That's why we have history books. You might be living through the last days of a superpower right now. And if it is, it's not like, frankly, much of this culture hasn't asked for it. However, we will not be a part of a self-fulfilling prophecy. If that happens, it's because it's a sovereign act of God, not the laziness of a people that were sovereign and left their citizenship at home, but instead recognized the answer is us. It is time for us to take our power back, to call this convention of the states, and then let's find out. Let's see what happens. Let's see who's better organized. I know this: you lose 100% of the fights where you never throw a punch. Let's throw a punch or two. Let's see what happens, because the clock is going to hit zero. It is ticking down now as we speak. When this game ends, one worldview will win, the other will lose. There will be no more time for pontifications, only obituaries. And frankly, I want the other side's worldview walking out of here on a body bag, not mine. I like politics when my side wins, not theirs. William F. Buckley used to say that he would rather be represented by 535 random names in the phone book than every member of Congress and the Senate. We're looking at how many of our churches were eager to close and not eager to reopen. Looking at how eager too many of our hospitals and medical professionals are eager to treat you like a lab rat or not treat you at all. Looking at how eager so many that we elect are to disregard their constitutional responsibilities, their own moral conscience. I trust the people in this room and people like you all over the country to preserve this last best hope for freedom east of Eden than I trust any of those damn elected officials. Don't take no for an answer. Demand your power back, and then when you get it, when they call this convention, you damn well better wield it. Thank you for your time.
It's even better than listening to him on air every day. What a blessing that you guys have him right here in your home state. What a blessing that he's willing to come and fight for this. You know, Steve's a guy who doesn't just talk, he fights, right? And you may not have noticed because he didn't take his coat off, but he is wearing a Convention of States Come and Make Me shirt. All right, a couple of housekeeping measures real quick. First is you should have all had one of these cards on your chair that has a QR code on that. If you scan that, it'll let you know who your legislator is and how to contact them. Today, you can go up to the chambers, you can use one of these pieces of paper at the back table there. Pink for the Senate, yellow for the House. You fill one out, they'll take it into your representative. You can give them your position on the issue. You can ask them to come out and meet with you. It's a great system. I love it, where you can actually be in contact with your legislator. I highly recommend that you do that. So those are at the back table right now. I'm going to close with this, because I'm going to close with something that the founders said. You guys all know this phrase, right? The phrase is, pledge their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. We all know that. You heard it. You heard it when you were a little kid. You heard it through middle school and high school. We all know that the founders pledged their lives, their fortunes, and the sacred honor. The question is, to what? And I think this is interesting. It gets left out of most history books. Most quotations say that they pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. And I think it's easy to assume that they pledged those to the fledgling nation, maybe to Washington, to the flag, to the idea of liberty. All of those things are worthwhile to pledge your life, your fortune, and your sacred honor. But none of those things are correct. They're not what the founders pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor to. In fact, right before those words, lives, fortunes, and sacred honor, it says, to each other we pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. To one another. For the men and women that have served in our armed forces, they truly know what that means. Because when they went into battle, they had their brothers and sisters next to them, and that's who they were fighting for. In the immediate, in the moment, that's what the fight was about. By the way, South Dakota House right now, just passed the House, 39-30. It's a good week to be an American. So they pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor to each other. Why? Why to each other? Why is that so important? People who fought, people who've been there, people like you who've sacrificed and been in those fights, you understand that. That guy next to you, that person next to you. Because if they fall, you fall. And this is what the founders knew. When they said lives, fortunes, and sacred honor, they knew that when they were signing that document, they were signing their own death warrants. Property would be taken, people would be hung, farms would be burned. Pledging your life, your fortune, and your sacred honor to your country doesn't stop any of that. But when you pledge that to each other, you know you have other people in the fight with you. You know that you have people that you can turn to because the fight is coming. One of the things that's really important to me about Steve and what he knows is he understands that we are in a war. Right? It used to be that we had a political fight going on. It used to be Democrat versus Republican, and they would win sometimes, the Republicans would win sometimes, it was all okay. We'd have a beer together at the bar later on. It's not like that anymore in America. The left wing in America, the hard radical left wing in America, they're fascists. They're totalitarians. They hate you. This is a new time in American politics. It's hard for us to understand this. People on the right, if you're a person of faith especially, we try not to have any hate in our hearts. We don't hate them. I think they have bad politics. I think their ideas are stupid. I think they're misguided. I don't hate them. I don't ascribe evil motives to most of them, anyway. But they hate us. There was a recent poll that came out that said over 50% of Democrats, I think it was 54%, think that the unvaccinated should be put in camps. It's absolutely incredible. In Austria today, mandatory vaccination for every person. This is what's coming to the world. So we pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor to each other because we know we are in a war. And we understand what's at stake. And to me, it's really personal. I know literally thousands of you across the country. I've been doing this, traveling this country consistently back and forth, up and down for 10 years. I've dined with a lot of you. I've hung out. I know your families. I've seen pictures of your dogs and your kids. I meet you in state legislatures. I feel like you're my family. You guys see me on Facebook Live. You know my dogs. You know when my dogs pass away. It's like a giant family all across the country. And that's why when I stand up here, I mean something when I say that I pledge my life, my fortune, and my sacred honor to you. I don't mean that generically. I mean it individually. I mean it personally. Some of us are going to get in trouble. It's going to hit the fan. It's going to be crazy. They're going to come down on a bunch of us. They're going to claim we did all kinds of horrible stuff. I was here in the legislature already being called a Nazi today. This stuff is coming. And I just want you to know that my attitude is I'm there for you, personally. If you need help, if you get in trouble, you reach out, we will do everything we can to help you. The staff will do everything we can. We can't always save everybody. We can try. We will always try. We don't always have the resources. We can't fix everything. I don't claim to be a miracle worker, but I just want you to know, me, personally to you, I pledge my life, my fortune, and my sacred honor. And I hope that when you guys leave here, you'll do that to each other. If you do that, and if we never give up the fight, we cannot be defeated. I appreciate you guys. God bless you for coming out today. God bless Iowa, and God bless the United States of America. Thank you.
Congress is full of people who don't know what the hell they're doing, but want to control your lives.
The longer they stay in, the more connected they become to special interests, and special interests are destroying our nation.
They give each other what they want, and they stick the taxpayer with the bill.
What's going to happen to the millennials? Unfunded liabilities plus debt now is $144 trillion.
Politicians come in and say they're going to change it, and they never, ever do.
We're not going to surrender the greatest country on the face of the earth and turn it into another failed European experiment.
The question is today, will we use the Constitution to save the Constitution?
Our framers in particular foresaw that this day would come.
The Peach State is making history. Lawmakers passed a preliminary measure today for a convention of states.
The Missouri House passed a measure calling for a convention of states.
The Convention of States.
The Article 5 Convention of States.
Convention of States.
Convention of States.
Convention of the States.
How does the Convention of States? Convention of the States.
The Convention of States.
Convention of States.
The States Project, Mark Meckler.
Now, you run a group trying to build a movement. You're saying the work is being done across this country to get to that 34-state threshold, and whether Washington wants it or not, the people hold a convention to limit the powers of the federal government.
It's right there in Article 5.
Article 5 of the Constitution was included by the founders for this exact time.
Where Washington would so depart from our principles
that only we, the people, could cut it down to size. So I think it may well take a convention to wake them up.
I've been a longtime supporter of the Convention of States to reestablish the sort of guiding principles of the Constitution.
The Convention of the States empowers the people of America to get some things done that they've long wanted.